It is Isaac Newton. The genius we know as the man who found gravity because an apple fell on his head. Isaac Newton is a very big name who is interesting for some, dark for others, but is considered by everyone to be the father of modern physics, who made incredible inventions. Newton is the reason we understand the universe better and can do mathematical calculations. In fact, he was not a person as he was known, he was an introvert, nerdy, vindictive, soulless person. One of his distinctive features was that he loved being alone very much. He doesn't have many friends, either. Despite this different personality, he was a very respectable person. So much so that even Wilhelm Leibniz, who accused Newton of stealing his own theories, said the following words for him: Newton did more in the field of mathematics than anything that had been done from the beginning of the world to him. Who is Isaac Newton? Ready when you are. Let's talk about your childhood first. Isaac Newton took his name from his father, because his father had died before he was even born. Isaac was born prematurely on December 24, 1642. During the birth, which was quite painful, 2 women who were with Hannah were sent to take medication. They didn't hurry because they didn't think the child would live. I mean, if we say that they left this man who changed the world to die, that's the place. When Isaac was 3 years old, his mother married Barnabas Smith, a wealthy man. After this marriage, a difficult period awaited Isaac. Later, his mother did not take care of him and left him with his grandmother. His uncle saw his potential and tried to help. At that time, when the number of books was limited, his uncle gave his own books to Isaac, which was a great chance for that time. The books his uncle brought to Isaac taught him to ask the right questions. Here, in his grandmother's house, the foundations of a curiosity towards physics that would never disappear again were to be laid. When a rope is rotated around its axis, why is there a tension in the rope? Here, a new question. Instead of playing with toys like his peers, Isaac tried to invent something at that age, like a model windmill, like the sundial he made at school. You see, at that age, Isaac was showing that he was different. Although he was doubted by his surroundings, he would ultimately change the history of world science forever. Although his uncle supported him, he was also aware that Newton needed a more serious education. So in 1654, he was brought to the house of an apothecary. This was very close to the king's school, the school where he was going to study. Apart from this, there is another very important feature. Rumor has it that Newton only once in his life, in this house, fell in love with Catherine, the adopted daughter of Mr. Clark. Even if we accept this as true, Newton was not a child who could easily communicate with the opposite sex. It was understandable that he was an introvert and a child who was found strange by his environment. He probably did not have a friend to whom he could open his ideas and tell about himself. In such a situation, it is inevitable for a child to return to his inner world. This was one of the most important lessons Newton learned at the king's school. As a child, when his school friends beat him up, he realized that respect is earned not only by strength, but also by reason. After that, if he couldn't physically respond, instead of running away, he would put his mind out. As the doors of Cambridge College opened for Newton, a new life was beginning for him. Newton studied at Cambridge College while also working as a waitress. Although her mother had a considerable fortune, she sent very little money. Newton was about to turn 19 and was 2 years older than the wealthy children he served. This was embarrassing for him, and this caused him to become even more distant from people. In college, he wrote the following in his philosophy notebook: I am a friend of Plato, a friend of Aristotle, but my best friend, the truth. Newton was a very hard-working and persistent person. He was very interested in celestial phenomena. He would not sleep at night and watch the movements of the comet. During the day, he was obsessed with the sun, and even went so far that he was trying to solve the secret of the colors that appeared in his eyes by looking at the sun for minutes with the naked eye. He once even tried to change the shape of his eye by plunging a needle into the lower part of his eye. Thus, He was waiting to decipher whether there was a connection between eye shape and colors. By 1664, Newton's life's work had already taken shape. In September 1665, England was facing a disease called the Black Death. The plague had swept all over the country and had taken the lives of half of the people in some cities. In October, Cambridge Council decided to close the institution. So Newton also returned home. Everything was just beginning for Newton, who, as he put it, was about to rise to the top of the age of inventions. Newton asked himself very important questions here. Why does an apple fall to the ground when it breaks off from a tree branch, but why doesn't the moon fall, and more importantly, why does the apple fall towards the earth? If we launch the apple quickly, will it orbit like the moon? Although he thought about these questions for a long time, he could not find an answer. Because he lacked two things. Firstly, there was not enough advanced mathematics to answer these questions. Calculus had not yet been invented. Secondly, he did not know the mass of the Earth and the Moon. These unknowns forced Newton to discover one of the most important discoveries in the history of the world in 1667, and he developed the mathematical method called Newton calculus. This 24-year-old man was changing the world. This mathematics allowed Newton to discover the law of universal gravitation. The same situation that applies to the rotation of the moon around the Earth, he also applied to the rotation of the planets around the Sun. Newton was building the foundation of physics. He revealed that the laws of physics are universal laws that affect everything. Not only that, he made very important studies about the nature of light. Aristotle suggested that colors are a mixture of light and darkness, black and white. This idea was still accepted in Newton's time. Designing a new experiment, Newton darkened the upstairs bedroom. He made a small hole in the curtain and placed a prism in front of the light that entered. The resulting spectrum was reflected on the wall on the other side of the room. When the white light passed through the prism, it decomposed into different colors. Moreover, each of the 7 colors was refracted at different angles when passing through the prism. The least red was broken, the most purple. When he held a prism to the dissociated colors again, he watched in amazement as they all merged again to form the color white. He devoted his days to these studies and realized that all the other colors were a mixture of the color white. Thanks to all his optical knowledge, he developed his own telescope, the reflecting telescope, in 1668. This telescope was so powerful that, although it was smaller and cheaper than those of its time, it was more powerful. During the 2 or 3 years that he was closed during the plague epidemic, he had made such discoveries that any one of these discoveries alone was enough to engrave his name in golden letters in history. But Newton did not intend to publish his work, because he was not yet sure that it was completed. Therefore, the scientific world would have to wait for him for decades. But still, his genius had opened the doors of the university's mathematics professorship to him at the age of 27. Thus, there was a significant development in his career. Newton first lost his mother and then went into seclusion when his roommate of 20 years left Cambridge. The remedy he found for loneliness was to work and work harder. Over the years, he has become a nutty professor. He eats very little and rarely sleeps before 3 at night. He was sleeping with the clothes on and got up again after a little sleep. He was concentrating so much that he was forgetting time and space. While going through these difficult periods, Edmund Halley, whose name we also know from the comet, visited Newton. You know, the namesake of Halley's comet. Halley was very surprised when he saw Newton's discoveries and calculations. These formulas could have changed the world. He persuaded her to publish her work, saying that he would also cover her expenses himself. Of course, Newton's reason for not publishing was not only the costs, but also the mental breakdown he was in. Newton decided to publish his work. Thus, a long period of the most intensive scientific studies in the history of science has begun. Newton worked on his book for months and finally published his great work, the Principia, that is, the mathematical principles of natural philosophy, on July 5, 1687. This development was a very important turning point in world history. The universe was now being explained with much more understandable mechanical principles. Principia was not an easy book to understand at that time, as it was written in Latin, full of drawings and formulas. Even some of his students, here. The book he was writing, he said, was the man to be understood neither by himself nor by others. And what does this Principia say? According to Newton's first law, if no force is applied on an object from outside, the object maintains its state of motion. If it is stationary, it continues to remain stationary. If it is moving at a constant speed, it continues to move at a constant speed. When we look at the planets, we see that they rotate by drawing elliptical orbits around the Sun, as Newton mathematically showed. In accordance with the first law, they do not go towards space on a straight line. This is where the second law comes into play. This law says that the planets are drawn towards the Sun at a right angle. Here a question comes to the mind of a person: why don't the planets fall towards the Sun? Newton says that centrifugal force balances the planets against the gravitational force exerted by the Sun inward. To better understand this principle, you can imagine an object tied to a rope. When you start turning the object, it neither jumps out nor falls into your hands. So if the planets stopped rotating and stopped, they would start falling towards the Sun because of gravity. The object represents the planet, and the hand holding the rope represents the Sun. The rope is the force that prevents the object from flying into the void. And the rope itself? There is no such rope in sight that connects the planets to the Sun. Which brings us to the third law. Against each impact, there is always a reaction of the same magnitude. Or the movements of two objects against each other are always equal and of opposite orientation. For example, the Moon attracts the Earth with the same force that the Earth attracts the Moon. The same applies to the world and apple. Only in the case of the apple does the applied force change the position of the apple, while the Earth does not seem to be affected at all, since its mass is much larger. With these three laws of motion, Newton established the branch of modern physics that we call dynamics. Everything, from the smallest atom to the largest planets, acted in accordance with the same immutable law. When it came to quantum physics, of course, the situation would move to another dimension, but this will not change the fact that Newton laid the foundations of classical physics. Newton's career continued not only with the identity of a scientist. In 1696, he began serving as assistant director of the Royal Mint. Later, he became the director of the Mint. In 1703, he became president of the Royal Society. He gave the association its golden years in terms of financial position and prosperity. Later, in 1704, Newton also published his book Optics, which he had written many years earlier. Principia complex geometric relationships described an experiment that when a small number of hosts and math work, optics, reflection and refraction of white light, the separation of the colors of the spectrum, the eye, the study of shape, image formation with lenses, rainbow colors, and much more detailed narrative of the construction work was reflective of the telescope. It was a book that had information from every field to the blood circulation that you would understand. In 1705, the Queen paid a visit to Cambridge. The royal proclamation was read, and a sword was drawn. When the sword touched Newton's shoulders, he was knighted. This great scientist, who wrote his name in golden letters in history, was named after Sir Isaac Newton. Now his reputation in the eyes of people was at its peak. There's a lot more to tell about Newton, of course, but if I try to tell all of it, it might take a few hours. So I tried to summarize as much as possible. Thank you for watching. I'm glad you're with me. If you are interested in this kind of content, don't forget to subscribe to my channel and turn on notifications and like the video.